Hi, Peter Charles here, Hooked Fly, fly fishing. And today let's talk about fishing for steelhead when the water is high and dirty. Now, a lot of us won't even bother going out in those conditions. No, we get a big rainstorm, the river blows out, the water goes to chocolate milk, and now it's too dangerous to go fishing then because you could end up swept downstream. But when the river begins to settle, it's still dirty, it's still high. But the wading is now safe, and any of that debris that had been flowing down the river is likely to be blown out. Less dangerous, but a lot of us still won't go fishing. I mean, you're looking at brown water, it's not the most pleasant. So, what are your odds of actually catching a fish in these conditions? I mean, over the years, I've done quite well when the water has been very off color and we've got about that much visibility. And I'm still catching fish. So, I went out the other day when it was high and dirty. It's about double the normal flow rate. Visibility was very poor, less than a foot, somewhere around there. And let's see how we did. Okay, let's take a look at the river here. As you can see, it's high, it's dirty. I would say visibility is about 1 foot. And it's probably up at least a foot over the level that I would normally come out here and fish. We had a lot of heavy rain, the river was very high, it blew a lot of dirt in, and as you can see, it is muddy. And I've caught in the past quite a few fish in this spot in these conditions. It can be done. Now today, my odds are rather poor. It's early in the season and this fishery is in decline. So the odds of me getting something are pretty low, but I want to demonstrate fishing in dirty conditions. And the first thing I'm going to talk about, funny enough, is my sunglasses. They're amber. If you are going to fish in dirty conditions, use amber sunglasses. You'll see a lot better into the water and you'll be able to see what you're doing. So let's get on to the gear. Now this might be a bit of a surprise, but I'm using a 15-foot type 3 tip. And a lot of people would say, aren't you using some T14 or something? Well, I don't want to be dragging the bottom. There's a few reasons for that. First off, our eyes, when we look down in this water, we don't see very much. We forget that the fish are adapted to these conditions, and they don't have any problem picking up a fly or a bait fish in these conditions. Secondly, as I look downstream, you can see you've got frog water to the inside and a seam about 15 foot off the bank. Well, if there's going to be fish close to the bank, and there often are in these conditions, they're going to be along that seam. If I'm using too much sink tip, I'm going to snag up down there. And if you're snagged up, you're not catching fish. The other thing to keep in mind is that fish are on the bottom looking up. So any fly we put over their heads is going to be highlighted against the sky. So I'm going to be using my Dirty Harry fly here. It's very successful in dirty water, and it has the things you want. Purple and black and red are colors I find that work very well in dirty conditions. Plus, this being tied on a very heavy salmon hook will get down on its own. My leader is 6 foot long, and I'm using a long leader primarily because when you have a fly that gets down, you can use a very long leader. And in fact, I've used as much as 10 foot in these conditions. Something to keep in mind, I used to fish these conditions with just a poly leader and a fast sink poly leader. I wasn't even using a sink tip, and I would catch fish. And it's because the fish are looking up, and they see that fly as they look up, and they can see what through this conditions, and they can feel the fly through these conditions way better than we can as we're looking into it. Always make a mend to help sink the fly. If you want to slow the presentation down as much as possible to give the fish a chance to acquire the fly. I mean, if the fly is zipping past them, it doesn't give them an awful good shot at it. When you get down to the bottom of the dangle, be patient. Stripping becomes part of the presentation here. You could have fish lying along that seam, and as you strip back, in preparation for your cast, you could pick up a fish or two. In the Credit River, I got a video of me fishing in conditions like this, and I had 2 heavy hits right along the bank, fishing the Dirty Harry fly. I didn't hook up, but I was stripping back at the time. The fly was not on the dangle. So it shows you that the fish will hit in these conditions as you're stripping the fly. And the thing is, when you strip the fly, it rises. So it was fairly high up when they hit it. So I think with these conditions, you shouldn't think of always being, scraping the bottom. It's not necessary. I don't want to be scraping the bottom. I want to be where the fish can fly, where the fish can see it. Now, something else I'm doing here. I'm only pulling out 1 or 2 feet of line between each cast. I'm not moving yet. I'm just going to fish this water before I move. When it's murky like this, you do not want to be aggressive going downstream, because you will not be able to cover the fish properly. The fish can only, even though they're better adapted to these conditions than we are, they still can't see really far in it. So you really want to be able to present slowly and move slowly, so you don't cast past a fish. So I'm only pulling out 1 to 2 feet of line, and then I'll start moving down very, very slowly. Maybe 1 foot to 2 foot at a time at most. Basically, you're moving downstream at the distance of the visibility. Now, because the water down there is not that deep and it's not fast, but because I'm not using too much sink rate, I'm not hitting bottom, which is a good thing. The other thing is, I'm not going to be casting really super far here. This river, you can have fish, away from the bank in these conditions. But, the odds of me getting a fish way out in the middle are less than me getting a fish in the last few degrees of the swing. Like right about here to the dangle is where more I would expect to get a hit today. In lower flows, further out, there's lots of places where fish can hold in this river. The bottom is pretty flat, and the flow rate is pretty consistent. It's not like it's really fast in the middle, but that's different from a lot of other rivers out there that are faster and deeper in the middle than they are along the banks. Here it's not necessarily as true. So that's about as far as I want to cast today. I don't want to cast any further. I'm just wasting time if I try to go too far. Okay, see, I'm only taking 1 small step because the visibility is not that high. I said earlier about distance casting. If the water's clearer and lower, I will try to go as far as I possibly can here, because I've caught fish on the end of 120-foot casts because of the width of this river and the fact that it can be lying in any dent or depression or ridge along here. But in these conditions, they're going to be closer to the bank. When you're trying to make that determination, look at the flow of the river. If you have got fairly even flows and fairly even depth all the way across the river, well, it really doesn't matter a whole lot where the fish locate themselves. But if you've got definitely faster flows and deeper flows the farther out you go, then you might want to consider just working the inside seams. Don't worry about going too far out. Something that's worth doing, and I will do it here, I will go down to the bottom of this run, which is roughly where those deadfalls are down there, and then I will come back up and go down it again, and then go down it again, and go down it again. Because when the conditions are like this, it's very easy to miss a fish in terms of your coverage. So by making repeated passes, I know with clear water you think of making 1 pass, and if you haven't caught a fish, there's no point going down a second time. In dirty water, you have to change that thinking. Making multiple passes in a run, it often will pick up fish, on your last pass, and it's happened to me multiple times where the fish came on the, my third or my fourth pass. My gear today is a Loomis Asquith 13'6" 8-weight. I'm using a Danielson 812 reel, and my line is a 420 Skagit switch line with a 15-foot tip on the end, basically turning it into a Scandi shooting head multi-tip system. And I've got a video on doing that, and I'll put that up in the card so you can see how I set this line up. But basically, I'm casting a multi-tip Scandi head in this setup. So when I'm fishing dirty water, I don't want to be in front of the fish, I want to be over their heads, which is the reason why I'm not using a lot of sink rate. And the other reason is I want it to still be fishing on the dangle. I don't want to be on the dangle and snagging up. And one of the ways you can avoid snagging up, you can see I'm standing next to the seam, and I just move my rod tip over so my line is more in the seam than in the frog water. And that gives you a better chance. If you're starting to snag up, just move your rod tip over into the faster water. But if you've got enough sink rate, see there, I'm on bottom there, I've got through some weeds. You see, if you leave it on, if it gets into the frog water, we'll get into the weeds. There we go, I've got some weed on the end of it. So what happened there when I picked up the weeds is I had my rod tip more straight downstream, and so the fly came across and hovered in the frog water, so it sank into the weeds. So right now I'm keeping it out over by the seam, and that'll keep it up a little bit more, and I won't have to worry so much about it snagging up. But the fish will be along that seam. There could be a fish in that slower water, but if your fly is stuck on the bottom, you're not going to get it. One of the other things about fishing in dirty water is I found no need to be out at dark 30 to catch fish. I catch fish in the middle of the day when it's dirty, which is probably one of the advantages of coming out when it's dirty, is that you can actually fish in midday. Your results may actually be better with the high sun, because the fish aren't bothered by the sun when the water's dirty, but they can certainly see your fly an awful lot better when it's silhouetted against the sky. So, something to think about, that, a lot of our instincts for fishing in clear conditions is to be out early, be the first one down the run, those sorts of things. All that goes out the window when it's dirty. When it's like this, be prepared for a hit on the strip. It happens. You notice how I put my rod tip back, and now I'm just moving my rod tip as the line swings to reduce tension as much as possible. If you reduce tension, you will sink the fly. If you increase tension, you'll raise it. So now I'll put it over into the seam and let it come around. Many years ago in a fly fishing magazine, two anglers did a test of where the fly was deepest in a typical steelhead swing, and it was found that it's deepest on the dangle. So that's an interesting thought when you are setting up your rig and your fish are likely to be closer to the dangle than out in the middle of the river. You want to set up your rig for the dangle, not the middle of the river. So you want it to be able to continue fishing while it's on the dangle. You don't want it to be on the bottom. So that's why I'm using a Type 3 15-foot tip instead of a T14 in these conditions. I don't want it to be dragging bottom when it's on the dangle. And just talk about leaders for a minute. I'm using 6 foot of leader right now. And I can do that because my fly sinks faster than the sink tip. In fact, I could go as much as 10 foot if I wanted to. The longer my leader will be, the deeper my fly will run. The reason why I'm only going for 6 foot today is I don't want it to get too deep. I'd be, snagging up on the dangle if I had a 10, 12 foot leader on here right now. The fly will run deeper than the end of the sink tip. And that's something that people kind of forget. They think the sink tip has to drag the fly down. But if your fly can sink well on its own, that's not true. It's the fly that's getting down, and the sink tip just helps it to stay down. When you're fishing conditions like this, you definitely don't want a fly that is somewhat buoyant or sinks very slowly, because, you know, for a good part of the drift, you're in the swing, you're going to be out of position. And I've actually watched this. I had a friend, in fact, on this very stretch of water, he was using 12 foot of T14 in conditions much like this, and he was saying, I'm not hitting bottom. Well, I got up on the bank and looked, and the water visibility was about like it is today. So if his fly had sunk more than a foot, I wouldn't be able to see it. And I could see his fly for somewhere between a half and 2/3 of the swing. So his 12 foot of T14 wasn't pulling that fly down. So you want to, when you're fishing conditions like this, you want a fly that gets down on its own. And it's one of the reasons why my Dirty Harry fly is so successful in these conditions, is because it sinks fast. It sinks at around about 5 inches per second, 6 inches per second, somewhere in that ballpark. I am just going to back up a little bit and make another cast through here. I just felt a little tiny bump. And when you feel a little bump like that, you're not sure whether you touched bottom, or hit a weed, or was it a fish just coming up and giving it a little tiny tap. Either way, back up and come back down again. You have to move upstream a few feet when you felt a bump, because if the fish comes up and gives the fly a little nudge, it doesn't mean it's going to go back and settle in at exactly the same spot. You feel that line just get, see the line just got pulled out from underneath my fingers? There's something out there. He gave that thing a little, he grabbed the tail and pulled it. I knew there was a fish there, but this thing is, I'm going to back up a little bit more. He pulled the tail on the fly. This fly has a long tail. And he pulled the tail, and he just pulled some line, about 3 or 4 inches of line through my fingers. So it's worth investigating. Don't assume just because there's a little tiny tap that, oh, I must have hit a weed or I tapped a rock. Now, there was a fish there. Whoa! That was a fish on the strip. There's what the Dirty Harry looks like in flying, and you'll be able to see how quickly it drops. You see how quickly that went down? That's what you want in a fly in these conditions. It's one that gets down on its own very quickly. The only downside to this pattern is the tendency to get these tail pulls, because it has a long wing, and the fish sometimes just grab it and miss the hook. Oh! That was exactly what I was just talking about. That was a typical tail pull, and it was a good solid one. Really got a hold of it too. See, this is my second pass, and I hit a fish. That was a little, oh, that's a fish. That was 2 pulls in a row. I'm gonna have to put a stinger hook on this thing. I don't want to. Okay, that's it. Well, you can see that wasn't too bad. I mean, I had 4 fish hit, and 2 of them hit twice. So that's not too bad at all. The problem was, this is the fly I was using, and the tail on it, or the wing I should say, is about 1 inch longer than I normally tie this wing, and I paid the price for it. The fish were coming up and grabbing the wing and missing the hook. And if you've done any steelheading, you know that's a constant problem with fish, and I should have known better. I shouldn't have tied this thing with such a long wing. It looks great in the water, but you know, you pay the price. I mean, I will do this in a 2 version at this length, and it'll put the hook back here. So it'll do a better job next time. But as you can see, if you use the right tactics, you can get fish in these conditions. So even though I didn't get a hook up, the point is they were finding the fly and they were hitting it. So that was 4 fish, 6 hits, over the space of an hour and a half in those conditions. So don't be turned off by dirty water. I mean, with the right tactics and the right flies, you can get fish. Cheers. Beautiful fish. Beautiful.